So you spent hundreds of hours building beautiful hardwood cabinets. Now your inexperienced install leaves you disappointed and frustrated. There's loads of content on YouTube that show you how to build beautiful projects, but there's surprisingly no dedicated content showing you how to prepare for and execute an install. Let's fix that right now. This video will provide countless pro tips that I bet you'll wish you knew sooner, including creating an install plan and materials list, protecting projects for transport, properly protecting your install area so you don't jack it up, understanding how to cover your ass and consider safety, ways to contain dust and debris, sequencing your install to work smart, not hard, what fasteners to use when, and repairs and touch-ups. So without further ado, let the learning commence. The first pro tip really sets the stage for a swift and professional install. Having a physical materials list and install plan can save trips to the hardware store and prevent you from ripping your hair out by the end of the job. Even if you are installing at home, start your materials list a day or two before the install day. This gives you time to remember tools and fasteners that you may have forgotten about. Creating an install plan will help guide your imagination through a process from start to finish. Use this plan to trigger new ideas and materials that you can add to your list. Here's the first mega tip. Use an app on your phone that saves these lists for future occasions so you aren't recreating a new list each time. In addition, they're a lot easier to edit this way. By the way, keep in mind, your business is your responsibility. This video is for entertainment purposes only, and I do not take responsibility for your actions. Install at your own risk. Pro tip 2 is important if you don't want to scrape, dent, scuff, and destroy your beloved project during transport. There are a lot of different ways to protect a product at many different price points. The most cost-effective way is to use blankets that you already own and cheap tape to wrap and contain the loose ends. Although, this doesn't have the best protection. And sometimes you don't want your customer to know that you own a blanket with fuzzy balls. So, the next option is to use moving blankets and contain them using stretch wrap. So if you rent a U-Haul or a moving truck, oftentimes they'll let you borrow these blankets for a small fee or even free depending on who you use. Otherwise, they are fairly inexpensive on Amazon. Make sure the blankets are clean and free of any particles or dirt. Any debris will likely create micro scratches in your perfect finish. Doubling up these blankets tends to add a lot more protection than one layer. This is the method I use. I wrap the project and fold over the ends. Then just stretch wrap the ends and sometimes add foam corner protectors to protect the edges of heavy and vulnerable items. The last and most expensive option is wrapping each individual item in foam, then adding foam corners and boxing each individually, sometimes with packing peanuts. And this offers the most protection, although cardboard gets very expensive and it takes a long time to package. But moving on, make sure you take the time and utilize helping hands to help you load your project safely if it's too large or too heavy. And use extra cushion between your tie-down straps and your woodwork if you went light on your wrapping. Make sure the ratchet doesn't dig into your workpiece, double check that you're secure, and you're on your way. So now you've arrived at the install location and you're ready for the next pro tip. Hey you! Protect the floors, you goof. You know you're going to drop a drill or drag a board, you don't want your shoes creating a mess, and you certainly don't want your customer to feel disrespected. So first thing, use ram board if there is a high risk of impact, or use non-slip drop cloths on carpet or slippery floors. The drop cloths I like have a backing that prevent them from sliding on stairs. If there is existing fine furniture in the house, which there usually always is, you can unwrap your project somewhere safe and use the moving blankets to protect the surrounding area. Be mindful of others in the house, and don't create slippery hazards or inaccessible emergency exits like this. So here's another mega tip that you might have seen in this video. Use brown paper to protect any surfaces as you install further components. Then you can cut or pull it out afterwards. Pro tip 4 will help you understand how to cover your ass and consider safety for any size of project. I suggest getting insurance if you install often or own a business. There's no ad coming, don't worry. Anything can happen and you want to be covered. Covering your butt is important because there's a lot of liability and responsibility associated with altering someone's home. even your own. Make sure you know common building practices and standards. Fastening to studs is much safer than relying on drywall anchors. For instance, on this overhead panel, there were 0 studs on this side to fasten my wall cleat into, so I used 4 drywall anchors instead. But Corey, you just said drywall anchors are less reliable. Yes, and in this case, I had an alternate system planned because I figured this would be the case. I welded a 1/2-inch steel L bracket that holds most of the weight of the panel. This bracket is screwed into the strong top plates of the wall above with robust structural lag screws. Even with less weight bearing on the sides, if the drywall anchors were to ever break loose, the bracket and rear cleats would hold the entire weight of the overhead panel. Not to mention, the accent wall components are cut to fit underneath to prevent any sagging from ever happening. Cover your behind. If you're truly getting something out of this video, please subscribe so that you don't miss any future content. Considering the safety of your customers and/or yourself is far easier said than done. Don't worry about making your stair treads perfectly smooth. The slicker they are, the higher the chance that someone will go flying down the staircase with your name on it. Think about every scenario to keep everyone's existence safe. This is the best you can do. And if you don't know if something is safe, then consult someone who does. Continuing on, as you install different components, you'll begin to drag dust and debris around the location. So how can you mitigate this and keep the area clean? I have a cheaper solution and more of an invested solution. The simple and easy way is to make your cuts outside. Avoid garages if your saws make a lot of uncontained dust, as this tends to make its way into cars and back into the home. Use thin plastic to cover furniture and isolate rooms. You can buy this plastic in long rolls or pre-cut, pre-sized sheets. The tape I recommend is this poly hanging and seaming tape. It has never pulled paint or left residue for me, and I've had it up for weeks at a time. And if you know how I work, then you probably already know my invested solution. I honestly use Festool to solve my dust collection and containment. For instance, I literally cut all of my components in this open house with no plastic hanging because my track saw and additional dust extractor in unison were enough to completely vacate the dust at the source every time. The reason I cut inside is because I was upstairs in a location that would have been hard to carry large and heavy components up and down the stairs in order to cut them outside. In this case, cutting inside increased my accuracy and made my work tidier, while decreasing plastic waste. Pro tip number 6 is vital if you have a complicated install or require support for structures as you go. Having a good sequence in which you install will help reduce steps and keep you from working harder than you need to. A great example of this is a cabinet base with a top and shelves above. In some cases, it may be smarter to install the shelves above before you set the cabinets. That way you aren't reaching over the cabinets and creating a possible risk that you drop something on the top. But in most cases, it's actually best to install the bottom first, then protect the surface, followed by installing everything above, because everything on top will either be referencing from this surface or in other cases bearing directly on it. This install was a doozy because I chose to install the waterfall desk and overhead panel first, then cut everything to fit perfectly in the remaining spots. Why did I do it this way? Great question, because more often than not, the walls aren't straight. And if I butted the waterfall desk up to accent panels that were installed on a wavy wall, the point of connection would look quite messy and unprofessional versus the way I chose. Sequence is obviously important. The world of fasteners is a vast topic, but this pro tip will help you understand when to use some of them. Use large lag screws when the weight is going to be quite heavy and you have a good portion of wood to mount to. Please pre-drill the hole to avoid splitting your stud or mounting structure. Use strong construction-rated screws when fastening medium-weight components. I recommend Torx head screws. If you have to use drywall anchors, I recommend these. Use washer head style screws when you're installing components like cabinets. These heads will reduce the chance of pulling through and letting the cabinet fall forward. Use heavier gauge brad nails like 15 or 18 gauge for medium to heavy trim, and use lighter 23 gauge pin nails with construction adhesive for light duty or pre-finished trim. The smaller holes are a lot easier to fill than larger ones. There are a lot more fasteners, but for the sake of moving on to the last pro tip, let's just say you are going to screw something up. I promise, and it's okay. thanks to this last mega tip. If you do cause a scratch or dent, slow down. Don't try to frantically fix it with your dirty fingers and some spit. You will certainly make it worse, and you'll make it impossible to fix invisibly. Part of my materials list for an install is a repair kit. This kit contains colored repair markers, super glue and accelerator, the finishes I used on the products, along with an assortment of small brushes, wax fillers, and abrasives like 1000 grit sandpaper or steel wool to rub out sheens and rough textures in the finish. To fix this scratch, I would test a small portion with a touch-up marker. If the color matches and the sheen isn't noticeably disrupted, then I would use this simple solution. Otherwise, using a liner brush with some of the finish is a good option if the finish is a fairly low solids product. A high solids product usually won't shrink enough to become invisible again. And absolute worst case scenario, don't be afraid to take that component home and refinish that part of it. Your integrity will shine through and your client will appreciate your perfectionism. Using products like hard wax oils will be easier to repair, but definitely won't offer as much protection as a film finish, so choose your poison. Now you know countless pro tips for installs, and I'll see you next time.